I've been using Aragorn, King of Men, aka Tier 3 Aragorn, a lot in this season of Tactics Evolved. I've been freaking loving him, and so I wanted to do an updated Aragorn, King of Men guide. Let's get into it. Alright, we'll start things off by taking a look at a battle report. This isn't my favorite battle report from King of Men that I have gotten this season, but I figured it was relatively fair. I am in full gold gear, at least fully strengthened, and I'm working on the refines on my items now. This Elrond is pretty close in terms of gear. We might actually have the exact same amount of gold stars. I don't know how good Elrond's unique is, however, it's really hard to get an absolutely perfectly even report, so I figured this one would work out quite well. I think I calculated this Elrond as like respect 11 or 12-ish, so somewhat close to my King of Men, who is R15 now. So pretty close in respect, pretty close in gear, and a very even fight overall, and Elrond is quickly becoming one of the most popular commanders in the metagame, at least in Tactics Evolved. And I think Elrond matches up quite well against King of Men because he has so much burst damage, and King of Men tends to play more like a glass cannon damage dealer in the sense that he does not like fighting big burst damage commanders. He likes shredding people that don't have a lot of upfront damage. That way his army can stay alive as long as possible so that he can deal more damage. And in this particular fight, I am using my latest twist on the hybrid build. It's a build that I've been testing out. I don't quite have enough respect, I don't think, to fully properly pull it off. I think I need about 6 more respect levels. Maybe I could get away with 3 if I dropped these points, but we'll talk about skill builds in a moment. Just wanted to show a relatively even report to show that King of Men is absolutely viable. I'm hoping and thinking that as people push to higher and higher respects and higher levels of gear, that King of Men will actually surpass T2 Aragorn in terms of overall viability. I think he has a ton of potential. He's a relatively decent enough season starter that can easily transition to PvP. He has some really niche specific matchups that he's amazing in, and his overall matchup spread isn't terrible. He does get completely blown up by Witch King, unless you have a very, very specific build. But other than that, he's a pretty good all-around commander since he is a glass cannon damage dealer. So let's go ahead and talk about the skill builds. I think there are 2 main skill builds for King of Men. This is not one of them, so ignore the build that I have pulled up right now. I think you have the tried and true safe skill build where you max your R5 title for the damage reduction for men units. You're going to want to put points into Anduril and Cold a Week. These 2 skills in combination are your most efficient damage skills per point, even though Precise Blow and Raid are technically your second and third best damage skills behind Anduril. Cold a Week, percentage-wise, isn't super duper great. However, the 15 points plus 7 in Cold a Week is only 22 points, whereas the entire Strider tree is technically 28 points. So per point, you get more value out of Anduril and Cold a Week than you do R3. However, you're going to want Anduril, Cold a Week, Strider, Precise Blow, Raid, and then any leftover points, in my opinion, are best spent in weapons expertise. I've seen some people prefer Return of the King. I don't particularly like Return of the King a whole lot because this doesn't start until round 5, whereas weapons expertise is all rounds of combat. Technically, Return of the King is a better overall damage increase. However, that's not factoring in the fact that it doesn't happen at the beginning of combat, and the beginning of combat, as I always say in these videos, is by far the most important. Those early rounds are super, super important, which is why I prefer weapons expertise. Theoretically, at respect 25, you could take full King of Men, full Return of the King, all of the points in the Strider tree, and all of the points in the Anduril tree. You could fill out all of those points at respect 25, which I think would be absolutely ridiculous. However, not very many people are going to have a respect 25 King of Men, so I would recommend your top R0 tree, your R3 tree, and the King of Men title. For the hybrid build that I have been working on, I think the Anduril tree, the Strider tree, and then leftover points going into Elisar and Elven Blessing has a lot of potential. However, this is going to require somewhere around respect 21 if you want 2 points in King of Men, and 1 point in Dunedain Bloodline for the extra 2 attack. Technically, you could skip these points and get away with full LSR, full Elven Blessing, full Anduril, and full R3 around respect 18, I believe it is, 18 or 19. Pretty sure 18 is the math on that. However, I really like the 2-1 in King of Men and Dunedain Bloodline because 2 extra attack for a hybrid build is pretty solid. And the final build that I want to talk about is more of the YOLO Glass Cannon build, wherein you do not have to max King of Men. This is the build that I've actually, I think, had the most success with overall this season, and it lets you get away with King of Men with a little bit lower of a respect level, and it's very straightforward. It's just all Anduril, all Strider, and you take the King of Men tree with 1 point in Dunedain Bloodline, and you level up King of Men and Return of the King evenly. You are trading off some survivability through the King of Men title in certain situations. However, your units aren't always going to be affected by stun or madness, which means you're not always going to be getting the benefit from the King of Men title, and at lower levels of respect, where you don't have a ton of extra skill points to invest. I think in most situations, you're going to get more mileage out of the full Anduril and full Strider tree than you would by cutting points from, let's say, the Strider tree to invest in the R5 tree. That's because, like I said a minute ago, I don't really like Return of the King a whole lot. At high respect, it's certainly a great damage modifier. But I just don't really like the fact that King of Men isn't always active. You're not always getting value out of this skill. Now, if you know you're going to hit like a Gandalf the White, a Sauron, maybe even Gandalf the Grey, like if you know that stuns and madness are going to be a problem, you can always reskill into King of Men at any time. But do keep in mind that this does require the use of men units, whereas if you're not investing heavily into the King of Men title, you can get away with running things like Guardians or Ram Riders, since you don't care that they're not men units. So as a quick recap of his overall skill options, I think the Anduril and Strider trees are kind of his core trees for pretty much every build. Other than that, you can invest in the R5 tree, or the LSR and Elven Blessing skills, depending on if you want to be like full Glass Cannon, full YOLO, or a hybrid type build. Overall, I think the best option, unless you're super high respect, is going to be the Glass Cannon playstyle, as you're just not going to have enough healing, even at respect 15. I don't feel like I have enough healing through just 9 points in LSR, and if I'm dropping points from the Strider or Anduril trees, I feel like I don't have enough damage. So in general, unless you're a very high respect, Anduril, Strider, and R5 stuff. If you prefer to cut some points from the Strider tree for the R5 tree, that is fine as well. As far as gear options go, I do have his unique item. I think his unique is better than a Flay Battle Axe, but not as good as either a Lethal Weapon Dawn or a fully refined Axe of Khazad-dûm with Cleave. However, I don't have either of those yet, so I'm going to be using Anduril for the time being. For a purple weapon, a Flay Battle Axe is the perfect option. Either way, you're going to be wanting a lot of might, so that Aragorn will be doing more damage. Gold armor, I like the Warborn Battle Plate because it gives melee defense as well as melee speed plus a sizable amount of might. As far as a purple option goes, a superior Halberd with melee vigor is a good choice because it's basically a baby Warborn Battle Plate that's giving might, it's giving defense, and it is giving the percent damage reduction. You could go with a scale mail with melee vigor, however you're going to be trading off some amount of might for extra focus. And in general on King of Men, the might is going to be better. Moving on to the helm, I have a Cask of Pride with Fortitude of Soldiers. I've also seen the version that, what is it called, Melee Suppression, that reduces early round melee damage. I've seen a lot of people using that as well. I went with Fortitude of Soldiers because I tend to prefer things that are always giving me value over things that are sometimes giving me value, and in Tactics Evolved, ranged units are extremely prevalent. Cask of Pride overall is giving you a whole bunch of might and an absolute ton of melee defense, and King of Men, in my opinion, should pretty much exclusively be using melee units. If you don't have a Cask of Pride, you could use a Brutal Helmet. See, I think I have one somewhere with melee vigor. Anyway, brutal helm with melee vigor. There we go. I do have one lying around. Or a full helm with melee vigor. If you're specifically wanting to snipe Witch Kings for some reason, you can use a full helm with blinding barrier. Keep that in your back pocket. But then you also have to keep knights in your back pocket. So in general, full helm with a melee vigor for the purple helm. Sorry. And for the accessory, I like the Belt of the Citadel with Iron Guard because I'm trying to push the hybrid build. You can do Belt of the Citadel with Arnor Defense to stack even more defense, or you can do something like the Ent Drought Calabash with Gift of Nature. The Belt of the Citadel actually has more might than Ent Drought Calabash does until you have refined the Ent Drought, I think, to a 3 stars is how the math works out. Belt also has Focus. The downside is that this is only giving men HP, where the Ent Drought is giving every single unit in your army HP. So if you're going to go for like the full YOLO glass cannon build where you're skipping the R5 title, maybe throwing in some Guardians, you definitely would want to use the Ent Drought because that's going to give those Guardians plus 6 HP, whereas the Belt of the Citadel is not. However, since this has Iron Guard for the hybrid build, I tend to prefer it. For a purple accessory option, I think you're going to want to go with a Hith Lane with either Mend or potentially Bane of Orcs, depending on what you are fighting. Hith Lane just has the most might of any purple accessory, and it is going to give you plus 3 army HP, which is solid as well. As far as your army composition goes, if you're investing in men gear like Anduril and or your Respect 5 tree, you're going to want to, unsurprisingly, be using all men units. If you are skipping men gear and R5, then you can throw in Guardians in the place of some other tank unit. Right now, I have Cataphracts, Guards of the Tower, and Bjornings on my King of Men. I've been testing out the Bjornings because they get a massive plus 50% damage modifier in Tactics Evolved, and I've been testing out the hybrid build as much as I can. In general, I've had the most success so far with an army somewhat like this. You can play around with the Cataphract and Guard of the Tower numbers, just depending on what your barracks looks like at that any given time. Guards of the Tower are obviously way cheaper and faster to conscript than Cataphracts. And I have the 1 stack of Cavaliers because they get to evade 2 attacks, assuming there's no pursuit in play. So they're just there to eat some random attacks and die, and let my other units hopefully live for a little bit longer. And as far as the actual hybrid build goes, I've had the most success running somewhere between 1800 and 2000 Dunedain, because in Tactics Evolved, they can't really take damage. I mean, technically they can take damage from like area of effect stuff, but generally speaking, they can't really take damage until your other units are dead. So they just get to sit around and deal damage. And as I said a minute ago, ranged units are extremely common in Tactics Evolved right now. Overall, in TE, I would totally shy away from a mono stack because of the Bow Knight skill that puts a debuff on units and makes them take increased damage. If you have a mono stack, that means the Bow Knights are always going to be hitting the 1 unit that's going to be taking tons and tons of extra damage. So in general, for YOLO Glass Cannon, put a 1 stack of just whatever unit you want in there whose job is to die. Load up on either Guards of the Tower and Cataphracts or Guardians and Cataphracts. If you are going to be using Guardians, you could even like split something like this where you have some Guards of the Tower and some Guardians. In general, like with other Glass Cannon damage commanders, you're going to want your army to live as much as possible so that Aragorn can kill everything. If you're going to push the hybrid build, and I would love it if somebody with like an R23 to R25 gold geared Aragorn does want to try the hybrid build, let me know. I would love to see some results. Hit me up on Discord and I can show you like the exact build that I think would work the best. You're going to want something like 2 tank units and then 1 damage dealing unit. That way, hopefully, your damage dealers add enough to King of Men's damage and the healing can sustain them enough that the army damage actually becomes a substantial portion of your overall damage in addition to the commander damage. Alright guys, that's it for this video. Thank you for watching.